So guys, I'm gonna try to help you out as much as I can. And yeah, so there's multiple ways to solve this problem, and I'm gonna just go through one way that I'm thinking in my brain of how to solve the problem. So the first way of how to solve this is a double nested for loop, which is sometimes not easy to understand, but it gets the job done and it makes the code a lot cleaner. So what we're tasked with creating a rectangle is we want to make a rectangle, but the inside be empty, right? So as you can see in this rectangle here, this rectangle has 4 rows. So 1, 2, 3, 4 rows go down, by the way. And it has 5 columns. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. For the way that my brain works and the way that arrays work and loops and everything, I'm going to start indexing everything with 0. So instead of starting with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, I'm going to be going like 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, so that you guys know that for the rest of this video. Anyway, the first way is creating a rectangle using nested for loop. So the first loop is essentially telling us what row we're on. I cannot spell. The second loop is telling us essentially what column that we're on. And the inside of the 2 for loops, as you can see here, is essentially going through each space one by one. So this is 0, 0. Like if you think of a coordinate system, this is 1, 0, 2, 0, 3, 0, 4, 0, right? That's what that's doing. And it's essentially saying that if I am on the first row, or if I am on the last row, or if I am on the first, if I'm on the, how do I explain this? If I am on the first column or I am on the last column, then I'm gonna print out a hashtag. So that is really simple, right? And then the last one, if I'm not on these, I'm gonna print out a space. So if I'm not on those, I'm gonna be in the middle here and I'm gonna print out a space. And then after each time I print out a new row, I need to print out a new line. So a good way of doing this is just doing system.out.print new line. And that should give us the correct answer. I'm gonna show you that it works. So you don't think I'm lying to you. So this is what it prints out. Now, in terms of tackling this one by one, I'm going to try to do this in terms of like how you guys wanted to, in terms of how you were learning it today. So for the first row, let's start with the first row. This is how my brain works in terms of rows and columns. So this is just, you're gonna have to follow along, and then you can replace this with the word width or height. So for the first row, what we're gonna do is we can start at 0 or we can start at 1. I'm gonna start at 0. And because of that, I has to be less than the amount of columns that we have, right? And then we increment I by 1. So the reason why we make this loop dependent on the columns, right? So I has to be less than the columns is because we are printing out the first row. And in the first row, there are, in this case, in this example here, there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 columns. So we have to iterate over the amount of columns there are. So for the first row, it doesn't matter essentially. So we can just print out sorry, I cannot type. We're gonna print out a hashtag. And then after this first row, we have to print out a new line. And actually, I'm just gonna use the keyboard shortcut. Okay. So we print out a new line. So now we're going to take this step by step so that you guys can understand what's going on. So I'm going to run it and boom, let's do it step by step. We see that it printed out a row of 5 columns. So now we're going to figure out, how do we figure out the middle rows? Now that's the most important part here. You're going to have to do a little bit of math to figure this one out the way that I'm doing it. So, there's other ways to do this. So this is the way that I'm doing it. So in my mind, I'm thinking of creating the number of middle rows, right? So how do we find the number of middle rows? So essentially the number of middle rows is the number of rows. So here we have 1, 2, 3, 4 rows are going down. Remember that? So the number of middle rows is essentially the number of rows total that they are minus 2. Right? So I know you guys probably, I'm not sure if you heard of while loops, but a good thing is that we have 2 middle rows. So we're going to need to make a while loop that's going to iterate over the amount of middle rows that we have. And the amount, we have to stop it when it's 0. So the number of middle rows has to be greater than 0, right? Because when there's no more middle rows, we don't need to print out any more rows. So the cool thing about the middle rows is that they have a starting hashtag and an ending hashtag. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a loop because we know how to create a row. And to create a row, we create a loop iterating over the columns. So I'm going to have I start at 0. Now you can have I start at 1. Like if you guys are confused right now, you don't know why starting at 0, you can have I start at 1. And then you can just have columns I less than columns minus 1, I think. Less than, no, sorry, less than equal to column. Anyway, we're gonna test if this works. Yeah, I don't really start loops at 1, but it's okay. So now that we know that we're iterating through the columns, essentially what we're going to do is we're going to have to check first in this loop. So if, in this case, I is equal to, and also for purposes of the way I wrote my code, I'm gonna go back. So I was just showing you that yes, you can use I starting at 0, or you can use I starting at 1. So if I is equal to 0, or I is equal to columns minus 1, and columns minus 1 is essentially the last column in my loop, because my columns go to 4 and instead of 5. So that's why I have to designate the columns minus 1 in order to represent this 4 that I have here. If you're not doing that, you're just gonna do I equals columns, right? So if we're on the first element here and the last element here in the column, then we're gonna print out a hashtag. Otherwise, we're just gonna print out a space because we don't need a hashtag in the middle of the middle rows, right? So just output a space, right? Now, so now we're still in this for loop. Ooh, we're still in this for loop. And we're gonna exit the for loop now, and we're gonna print out a new space, because remember, after each row, we print out a new space. And another thing that we have to do is remember to take the number of middle rows that we had and subtract it, -1. So number of middle rows minus equal 1. You can do that. Or you can just do number of middle rows minus minus. This is just going to subtract 1 from the number of middle rows. So let's run this and see how it's working to see if we need to fix anything. So now, as you can see, I have my middle rows. Isn't it so perfect? It's beautiful. The last thing we need to do is print out the last row. And to print out the last row, essentially, we are going to copy the first code, because the last row is essentially this. Okay. And there are multiple ways we can do this. We can store this in a string, like the row variables in a string. And we can just print out the string for the first row and the last row. And now, once I do this, it should run. And look at this beautiful rectangle. So I hope you guys understood the code and the way that you should be doing this row by row. Or, you know, if you want to do column by column, if that's how your brain works, then you can do this the opposite way and just do it column by column. So I hope that helps. And if you have any questions, and feel free to contact me.